Thank you, Dr. Habla. Thank you for this brilliant presentation. And I have two small confessions before I start commenting. One is that we have to realize that economy is the mother and father of all social studies. And marketing is the most important application of what the economists say. The second confession is that you, Professor Dan, successfully complicated our life. And I think also you complicated the lives of the policymakers. Combining trade and data for development is very intriguing, actually, because I think now we are living in the age of the wealth of nations is measured by the amount of data they have. It's not oil or gas. It's the data, the information they have. And that's why countries are more advanced and countries are trying to follow. And again, the wealth of any company or corporation is the amount of data they have. This is one thing. When I go through your presentation, the two slides, actually, the smile curve and slide number 2, the smile curve is very important because actually it refers to how we start and how we end. And it seems to be that marketing is the major component of this curve. When I talk about marketing, I'd like to stress the point that marketing without an effective supply chain from the beginning to the end, the marketing system will be ineffective. The slide number 2 about economics of data-driven economy, again, we're talking about data driving the economy. In which direction? I have a problem when I try to look at those 2 points. I mean, the economy, the market, the use of data. Gathering data is not easy. This is one. Second, compiling this data is not easy. This is second. Using the data, again, is not easy. That's why I gave you a small paper about how can you use the general theory of system analysis. Okay? Because actually any system have input, process, output, and feedback. And the marketing system is the same. The economy is the same. So we need to have a centralized, I can call it a central command system that can have, and I'm not talking about companies, I'm talking about the whole economy. I could have a system that can gather all the information and disperse it depending on the needs of the different sectors. Suppose we are talking about industry, trade, supply, the connections between companies, because actually, when you're talking about the irregularities or how can the market be regular, you need to have a system that can use the information and data to avoid bottlenecks. Because actually what happens sometimes is that you have shortage in one place and surplus in another place. And this is actually will affect the efficiency of the economy as a whole. So how can we, even in developing countries, develop this kind of a system that can provide the policymaker with the information needed to avoid bottlenecks or to reallocate the resources to be used efficiently. This is another point. What else? Actually, what I'm trying, I mean, my comments are not too many. I was trying to sail in this presentation.
Literally, sail is the right word.
Depending on the direction of the wind. Okay, so I said this way, if the wind goes this way, I go with it, so that I don't drown. It is a very complicated presentation. As I said, it makes our life very complicated. I'm trying to find a way out to escape this, this very situation. Anyhow, there is a lot to be said in this presentation, but at the end of the day, I think it's worth reading carefully. It's worth spotting some lights on what the challenges you are facing in the future, especially when we're talking about artificial intelligence, talking about the amount of data that can be available. Because it's when you have, the problem is for decision maker, either he has a lot of information that he's going to be confused, or too little information that cannot help him. So the balance between how much information we need to have to make a right decision is again a question of specific situations. Anyhow, I don't like to say more. I read this paper again and again, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Hassan. Engineer Tarek, تفضل.
Well, that's the tough part. I honestly, I'm not quite sure where to start, but I mean, you've analyzed, you know, the whole process in a very articulate way. I mean, but without any solutions. Obviously, you know, we're getting into an area of uncertainty, and I'm not quite sure if anybody has the answers as such. And then it raises a lot of ideological questions. As a matter of fact, you know, which way to go? Is it more state intervention in economies? Are we clamoring the China model versus the liberal economies? The data acquisition, is it a propriety, like you mentioned, of states, of individual companies, or is it open? I mean, I'm not quite sure where the answers are. Who's going to regulate the data and how? I'm not quite sure about that either. And let me take it one step further. I mean, because this puts quite an ideological rift between democracies as we know it and a different form of governance, you know, like autocracies in many different guises. Which way is it going to go? That's one question. And then my main concern over here really is what about developing countries? Where do they stand? In the case of Egypt, for example, we are at the crossroads of development. We are, again, maybe one step behind. When we talk about FDI, we're still talking about T-shirts to the United States. You know, we're not talking about technology as such. Yet again, you know, when we talk about regulating data, we are at a situation right now where the IT, intellectual property, or I mean data rules and laws are being discussed in the parliament. What measures should be taken? There is a drive on controlling the flow of data in Egypt from a security-based perspective. And let me just give you some examples with the proposals of the law. I meant to mention that because I'd like to pick your brain on this issue. Which, a developed country, which way would it go? For example, you know, having a control or a permit on any data transfer to outside cloud systems would require a license from Egypt. Is this right, or is this wrong? Having an incredible investment in a local service mechanism, that is setting a whole, acquisition of service and controlling it is being done by the state right now. Is it the right thing or not from a security-minded basis? Even marketing, would require a permit up front. These are in the course of discussions as we speak today in the parliament. Which way do we go? There is no clarity. And there is a very fine line between development of an economy and serious or legitimate security concerns. You said, the whole idea of having malware in any kind of digitized economy could wreck the whole economy. So again, this raises another question, or puts certain legitimacy in the minds of certain stakeholders on how to get things done. I'm not sure. And then you're talking about state investments as opposed to private investments. And this is a growing trend, notably in a country like Egypt. Would that be done with an exit strategy, or would that be done with a trajectory of continuous existence and control? And who has the resources to maintain that? Who has the brain power to do that? Explosion of data, when I look at it, it's becoming exponential in the sense that access of information is available to almost every individual in the world. You have internet accessibility through mobile smartphones. It's becoming the norm, not the exception. Imagine, the brain power behind an educated globe versus an economy in the past that was manipulated by the knowledge of 1% historically. So you can imagine the impact of the data explosion. Where will this lead us? So, and it's democratized, like you mentioned. But who calls the shot? Who controls it? With the sinister deeds of mankind over history, how would we expect that this data explosion would be manipulated in the form of the kind of cartels, mafia type, but with a digitized approach, I'm not sure. It raises so many questions, and I'm not sure I can answer them. Brain power and education is definitely one of the fundamentals, but you're talking about now the role of machines, even when it comes to artificial intelligence and taking over the role of blue collar. Where would education stand? What type of education? Whether this education will be an elitist few that will control the data knowledge, where will the rest of the population go? White collar and blue collar. I don't know. You've hit me on so many fronts, that I'm not quite sure. I'm just, speaking my mind out. But anyway, I believe, maybe that's enough to start the discussion. Because again, you have triggered so many issues without giving clear answers, which I'm sure you might not have the exact answers, but at least you can entertain us with some ideas of where will we be heading. And again, it just sends the jitters in me, to see more of a totalitarian, state-run economies, So when you look at these futuristic films, where the state is controlling everybody with artificial intelligence, it seems to be we're getting to this reality. It seems to be sooner than later. How to regulate that and how to develop, I don't know, I'm not sure. But anyway, I think that's enough.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let me add a few questions to the pyramid of questions that you have. I thought that the talk was extremely brilliant and eye-opening, really. And even though it doesn't have the solutions, for sure, except in a certain angle, but if you don't diagnose the problem, you will never find the solutions. Okay? And there is a very clear message that's emerging about the companies, all right? Companies are the source, they are the drivers for everything. So at least this is a message for countries like ours that we need to pay attention to a private sector, actually. We need to have companies pushed forward, and we need to correct our system because our system does need correction. Having said this, let me add two items, or actually 3 items that add to the complexity of what you added. Okay, a couple of things that you did not talk about, but that are extremely interesting. One of them has to do with the nature of the taxation system that should exist in the world to be able to cope with the new technology. The new technology is showing itself very strongly in services. And trade in services is another world altogether. Countries cannot tax them, almost literally. All right, so this is illegal evasion of taxation. All tax laws are based on having storage space, a company, I don't know where, physical location somewhere. When you talk trade and services, you have none of these. So it's happening, and countries cannot capture, not only the developing countries, but even internationally, actually, it is a problem. So this is one. The second one has to do with cybersecurity. The whole game is about data. And if data is not secure, we have a big problem. We had a very big conference just a few days ago, jointly with KPMG about cybersecurity. And in digging for information, we found that the loss of resources due to lack of cybersecurity has reached $3 trillion in 2015 and is about to reach $6 trillion in 2021. The biggest wealth transfer in history from legal businesses to thieves, okay? But they are, white collar, neat, intelligent thieves, okay? So what is going to happen, all right, in the world? Different kind of thieves. They're not pirates, they are pirates of a different nature, and that it's becoming more complicated. The third item I want to add has to do with the China and US issues and problems, and what you actually alluded to, that China is actually going to get over the US. China is the winner out of this. The US is the one that's starting to lose economy and companies. I was in China recently in attendance of a conference. There was an economist who put together a model trying to estimate what's going to happen, the kind of loss that China will face because of all the penalties that the US is putting. And he said something extremely interesting. He said China is not going to be affected at all, because China is actually exporting to the rest of the world, to the US, through 25 other countries. So the only way China would be hurt if those 25 countries adopt the same sanctionary measures that the US is adopting. And this is not going to happen, so forget it, go take a hike. Almost literally, he said that. Okay? So it's actually extremely interesting there. As for the question, I have actually 2 questions. You gave some specific recommendations on how the WTO should change itself in order to run. And of course, there are a lot of details and that one can talk about, but my question is, do you think that the present institutional setup of the WTO can accommodate such changes? The WTO as it is set up, just like the World Bank, just like the IMF, with the shares of the countries, with government representation, the way it is, can this type of setup of political economy handle this? I mean, this is where I see the huge, scary gap. If companies are the drivers, then companies need to be there, all right? And which companies, and at what level? I think if we do not put the proper institutional setup of the WTO and other organizations, the suitable one, we will never be able to cope with this. And then my second question is, of course, is related to Egypt, and I'm adding to what Dr. Hassan said and Engineer Tarek said. Where does this take us? When you are looking about the change that happened in the world, you said that at the beginning land was the most valuable thing. Well, land is still valuable for us. So we are a country where we have 1 foot in the past, okay, and 1 foot in the future. Okay? Well, how do you handle what's happening to your technology over here? What's happening to your technology? Yes. Yes, of has to be hit in order to work. Okay, like this, yeah. So about a country like Egypt, as I said, we have one foot in the past and one foot at present and sort of a finger or a toe in the future. We appreciate land very much. Land is one of our biggest issues, okay? We still export t-shirts, okay? And we like them, right? So, and at the same time, we have a big wave of digitization that's taking place. We have an extremely active private sector in technology-based entrepreneurship, to be specific, all right? How do countries of our nature handle stuff like that? How do we get prepared? We are not going to be prepared for the full package of change, that's for sure. But how can we start? Okay, and here I don't want to repeat, it's the same questions actually that Tarek was raising a minute ago.
I have one comment before you start, if you may. I mean, because it just hits me. You know, I mean, there is a growing trend right now. Bear in mind that, you know, intellect of today is not like intellect of yesterday, and there is a growing sense of conscience amongst a vast, you know, base of population, notably in the Western world. And there is a drive, again, you know, from within companies and employees on sustainable development, rather than the process of maximizing profit, as we know, from a capitalist standpoint. And we see this trend, again, putting limitations on the shareholders on how to go about it. Let alone, you know, the concern of this intellectuality on the, of course, sustainable development is, you know, the well-being of the whole globe at large. And then again, you know, with the scarcity of such knowledge or technology-based knowledge, you know, those who have the knowledge as individuals can have a say and can dictate on corporations what they do. Accordingly, you know, you're seeing certain trends within big corporations, like, you know, the case of, was it Google or Amazon, you know, where employees stood against, you know, investments with the American government in certain defense mechanism, you know. And it seems to be like a growing trend amongst a broader base of the population in the Western world, you know. How would that have limitation as opposed to a totalitarian regime in the likes of China? And would that be breaking out a system that exists, competitiveness of the West accordingly? Again, it raises a question, which way to go?
Thank you very much. I think there is room for taking like 2 questions from the audience and then giving you the chance to take off with all these questions.
My name is Mohammed El-Banna, Professor of Economics, Manufia University. Thank you, Dr. Abla, to organize this event, and thank you, Prof. Dan, for this brilliant and distinguished lecture. I have 2 questions. The first one is about the title or the description of our economy nowadays, the world economy nowadays. I read about knowledge-based economy, and sometimes we call the world economy as digital economy. And today you introduce another description, data-driven economy. Which one do you prefer, or if there is, or there are differences between these titles of world economy? The second one is about the World Trade Organization, WTO. Do you think that we need another rounds of negotiation to establish a new world economy? This is the second question. According to what you have mentioned and according to the development all over the world, I think these very important questions about the World Trade Organization agreement. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Please, in the back.
Thank you. My name is Mohammed Nusser. I work at the private sector. I have 2 questions. Egypt is not a competitive country, frankly speaking. It has to do with mistakes ourselves, has nothing to do with outside. But do you think it is a good idea when we sign the free trade agreement that right now we are importing substantially more than what we are exporting. In addition, also, that after the devaluation of our country, our currency a few years ago, we just increased our export by 10-20%. So it ending up that we are not that benefiting from it. Second question has to do with the data also. I mean, we have fundamental problems with our economy, in my opinion. Do you think that how data will help us? We are not that technology-driven country and so on. So we need to fix our fundamentals first, and then we consider about data and so on. Data is excellent for Amazon, for advanced countries, but so far I don't see that benefit for Egypt. Thank you.
Last question here, please.
Hi, I am Maya Mustafa, Assistant Lecturer at Institute of National Planning. I have two small comments. First, before I come here, I was looking at numbers related to the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals in Egypt. One of the numbers that I stopped at that exports in Egypt with high technology component as a percentage of total exports of Egypt. It was in 2018 0.34%, which is less than 1%. Less than 1% of high technology components. This is numbers that we have to stop at, and it's related with what your professor talked about. This is one of the guides that we have to look at, and it will be a guide for us in order to have a place in this technology and this data-driven economy. This is first. Second, it's a personal experience. Me and my husband was talking about we want to buy a chair, okay, a desk chair, and then in the same day we look at the Facebook ads about desk chairs. So this is how data, we are talking about something and this is not normal to have it on the Facebook ads. And even when I'm talking with my colleague in Germany, she says that when she thinks about something she wants to buy, she finds the ads on it on the Facebook and social media, not talking about that, only thinking. Thank you.
So there's a number of points were raised, and I'll try and touch on them as best I can. I'll start off with, I guess, the issue about answers, and right now the advent of this data-driven economy, the application of data is disrupting the world pervasively. At the economic level, at the social level, at the political level, at the international level. So it's like you had this structure that we had developed over the decades, which ruled by the WTO and the GATT, which we understood, the rules-based system. We knew how the pieces fit together. Now it's like an earthquake, and everything has been torn apart. How will it fit back together? We do not know. I think that's the first fundamental point to be aware is we do not know. So one of the things I have emphasized is that data is not treaty ready. We are not ready yet to sign treaties about data which would constrain how we will regulate it in the future. I wrote that 2 years ago. The other day, Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, pulled a section of the data chapter of the IP chapter, data chapter out of the USMCA, the new NAFTA agreement, for exactly that reason. She said she did not want to see the United States constrained in the future by international treaties regarding how we would regulate. Not because she knew, but because she realized she didn't know. So we need a period of time to wrap our minds around this. So it is not a time right now for answers, it is a time to get the questions listed, and that is really important. So just being aware of that. The second thing, by extension, the WTO is not ready yet for a round. What we really need to do is to start the process of thinking through these various issues. I hope the list I've provided there shows you that it's a different world that we have to negotiate than the one that we were used to. Even competition policy, for example. In the Uruguay round, what was the competition issue was how to pry open government monopolies, which is basically postal services to get services like FedEx to be able to compete in the market. And we had issues such as competitive neutrality conceptualized to set up how we would actually structure this. So post offices would have state-owned functions when they do state-owned, and they would operate on a commercial basis when they're operating commercial stuff. That was competition policy then. Today, competition policy is about private monopolies and how to tax them. It's completely different. It's about market access. So we have to reconceptualize what we were doing in the WTO, and there's a short list of things there. In terms of ideology, so to me, there are laws of nature, as it were, or laws of economics, which all countries, regardless of the ideology, must obey. The Chinese Communist Party and Xi Jinping are subject to those laws just as much as Donald Trump in the United States, and as we are. So I think, and ultimately, every economy that wants to succeed has to be in sync with the laws, those laws of nature. If you construct an economic framework which is inconsistent with where the way the world works, you will see that economy will fall behind, and you will see everyone else moving ahead. So the best example to follow in terms of what to do and what not to do is to look at what's successful. So China, it copied the United States, not its technology so much, that's a red herring. It copied everything else about the United States. It saw that the United States was leading the world in patenting. It became the world's leading patent issuer. It saw the United States had a litigious structure for dealing with intellectual property protection. China is now the hottest market for intellectual property litigation. Now, you can say that there's ideology there at the supreme level, but drill down even an inch thick past the superficial layer of governance that is at the political level. And you see an economy in China that's kind of running more or less along the same rails as the United States. So I think that economics will take everyone to the same point. China will evolve, the US will evolve, and what we really have to think about is what are our conceptual our ideological blinders that are stopping us from doing things that are the correct things to do. In the West, we have the idea that government investment should be horizontal, in infrastructure, those kinds of things, and that we should not pick winners. And yet, in the world that we actually are living in, where governments are being forced to provide tens of billions of dollars worth of subsidies for very specific investments, the United States had just given the Boeing $5 billion to develop some space product. That's, I think, a space shuttle or something. That's very specific investment. Maybe it's called military, something, and therefore it's exempt from the industrial policy label. But the point is, governments are investing. Europeans, the Chinese, the Americans are all doing it. And why? Because there are strong public good aspects to the investment opportunities. The world has changed, and it changed in a way that that requires more state, both in terms of investment and in terms of regulation than was before. This is not a state planning, sort of a call for state planning. I'm not sure whether or not Hassan's idea of this sounds, the input-output model, which you described, was originally conceived by Vasily Leontiev, who was a Soviet central planner. He understood the way the economy worked, and possibly, if that idea had been developed in the age of data, when we had enough information that machines could actually figure out what to produce when and where, then Soviet central planning might have worked. And it still might work, something similar might work in the future, but I think that application remains to be developed. So I'm not sure that ideology is the central issue. If we think about the way democracies are working right now, let's talk about Brexit. In Brexit, the parties that were, the popular vote against Brexit was at least 52 to 48. The Conservative Party got about 43% of the vote, 58% of the seats, and 100% of the power. Okay? And in Brexit, you had clear, documented interference from foreign parties selling slogans to people that cause them to vote against their own interest. So you have a meaningless statement like, take back control. Now, no worker in Sunderland is going to take back control. He never had any control, he never will have any control. It's meaningless. But that worker will lose his job in a Nissan factory that will move to the continent. So when people vote against their own interest, democracies don't work. When people are caused to buy something by suggestion, and Facebook, by the way, is working on mind control. They've actually got a program on that. I don't think it's active yet. But what your web search, your pattern, it is said that these companies know more about you than you know about yourself. And when markets work that way, it's not a market. You're not shopping across a bunch of opportunities that are presented in a neutral fashion where you optimize your consumption habits. You are being manipulated. Democracies don't work when people can be manipulated to vote against their interests. Markets don't work when people don't buy according to their interest. And the question of totalitarian societies with surveillance, with state surveillance, I'm not sure what the difference between state surveillance and surveillance capitalism is. They have converged. They're both dystopian. So I think we need a new way of thinking about the world that is based on from grassroots, or actually from first principles up. We have to review how we think about the world and not be blinkered by the old ideologies. In terms of the source of wealth, land is valuable. People still fight about it. We have in the Middle East, land is very, very important. In Darfur, in South Sudan, the wars over water and land that's what caused it. These were the first ecological wars, the first climate change wars. The only thing is that land is no longer the source of rent. It doesn't make you wealthy. It allows you to survive. So Egypt has got valuable land, and people will survive on that. Egypt is still producing goods, which, as again, is producing at the bottom of that curve. You will have jobs, but you will not be the wealthy ones in this world. So the question of data is, if you want to move up the value capture areas of activity, you need to be active in this world. So it's not about jobs, it's not about surviving, it's about becoming prosperous. And for that, you do have to get into the 21st century, even though you do have a stake in the thousands and thousands of years or millennia of the valuable land and the water that flows down from Ethiopia down here, bringing silt. As the Ethiopians call it abe, and they say abe takes away our soil and gives it to Egypt. and that's wealth of a sort, but it's not the source of rents. And then technology exports. This is also mentioned. So the hallmark of a wealthy economy now, you go anywhere in the world, and what you will see is companies that use technology, companies that produce technology and develop technology. And there are thousands of these companies. And the way to think about innovation and finding an area where there is rent to be extracted, it's the rent that makes you wealthy in this world, okay? Think about, here's the example I told Abla. Okay, so the person who invented the telephone was Alexander Graham Bell. Now, does anyone here know what Alexander Graham Bell's profession was? He was an ear doctor. Yeah, he knew about the ear. And his hobby was electronics. And he combined the ear and the electronic hobby to create the telephone. And that's the way things work. So Edison, when he built his electric lighting system, he took the idea of a gas distribution, which is already established, and the electric light bulb, and turned it into a lighting system. So you take two ideas, you marry them, you create a new one. We even make words that way. Philosophy, we join two, love and knowledge together to create philosophy. That's the source of new innovation. So, and companies are the locus in which ideas, commercial ideas, are held. So if you have no companies, you have nothing to combine and no way to innovate. If you have tens of thousands of companies, you can join the dots amongst any of them. So the new industrial policy. So I'll speak here about Canada. Canada is a hotbed of artificial intelligence development. Montreal is. Now, what happened is that this company called Maluba was bought out by Microsoft, and it was transferred to Redmond, Washington, including its chief engineer, or its chief scientist. So that chief scientist is having his coffees and his dinner conversations and spreading his knowledge in Washington and not in Montreal anymore. It's a huge valuable asset that's gone for Canada. On top of that, Maluba no longer exists to be combined with all the other companies in the Montreal area to cross-pollinate and create new innovation. It's now doing that in Washington. So the new industrial policy is not attracting inward investment. It is outward investment to acquire technology and bring it back home. That's what China was doing, and when the Americans finally figured this out, they blocked it. Okay, so your objective in Egypt is not to attract FDI. It is really to go out and buy companies and bring them back to Egypt. There's three ways that you can make a company. You can build it on your own, and that obviously is quite difficult in almost all developing countries, including here. You can attract it, borrow it, by giving fiscal incentives to foreign direct investment, but foreign investment is being, that kind of foreign direct investment is sought after by everyone. It's hard to get. The only other way is to buy it. So I was telling that developing country this story. This is in Trinidad. And I said, you're not getting foreign direct investment. You're obviously not being able to build your own companies. Why don't you go out and try and buy some companies and transplant them to Trinidad? And they stopped me and said, we actually did that. There's a beer called Stag Beer, and the Trinidad had bought that company from Czechoslovakia, transplanted it, set it up, and 20 years ago, and there it is, it's a competitor for Banks Beer, the only other beer company in Trinidad, and it's up and running. The Chinese, when they wanted to get into the motorcycle business, they invited first Kawasaki and Honda to come in and build a motorcycle plant. The Japanese said sure, but they would not give the Chinese plant an export mandate to compete with themselves. So China said no thank you. They went and bought a German motorcycle company, transplanted it, got into the motorcycle business, started exporting, and then Japan came in and defensively bought the company from the Chinese. So instead of giving fiscal incentives to the Japanese to come there, the Chinese got money for it, for the plant that they had bought. So that's called fishing for foreign direct investment with bait. Most developing countries go fishing for foreign direct investment with no bait, and they don't get FDI. Go there, start up something, and sell it to the multinationals, you got a better chance. So my story here still is about technology and firms, and the way to get forward, both in terms of innovation, in terms of having ideas to connect, new firms to build, is by having a lot of firms. In Silicon Valley, it is said that you can change jobs without changing parking lots. That's how many dense it is, okay? And the source of skilled labor is almost entirely from other companies. So if you don't have companies, you don't have a source of skilled labor. One after another problem pops up if you don't have a large population of firms. So your challenge in a country like Egypt is to, first of all, build up that population of firms. And if there is a public policy that is blocking that, you desperately need to change that. Okay? And on top of that, you have to think about not inward foreign direct investment necessarily, but outward. Technology seeking investment and bringing that back home to Egypt and setting up your building up your capabilities on that basis. So I guess I'll leave it there. I think that there was a question about the how we label the world, KBE versus DDE. So I see again the world as being the nature of the economy shaped by the basic type of essential capital, which is the scarce and valuable capital. So economic systems work to conserve and optimize the use of the scarce factor. That's why labor or socialism never worked. Socialism didn't work because the factor of production that tries to optimize is labor, and labor's never been scarce. Okay, capital was scarce in that age, and so capitalism, which conserved capital, is the system that prevailed. In the world of land was the source of wealth, and it had to be optimized. In the modern world today, intellectual property plus data, which is a source of more intellectual property, is the valuable asset which is to be optimized, and therefore that's the driver of the age. Knowledge-based economy refers to the intellectual property-driven economy. The data-driven economy refers to this new version of it's kind of a KBE, DDE world. So I think both labels kind of apply, but if you think about what the system is trying to optimize, which drives you forward, which makes you wealthy, today it's going to, and for the coming several years, it's going to be data. So, have I covered?
You did a great job, really. Thank you very, very much for a very interesting talk. And thank you, commentators, for raising a lot of questions. And thank you, audience, for being with us. وكل سنة وانتم طيبين، الكريسماس والنيو يير. خلاص نشوفكم السنة الجاية بقى إن شاء الله بإذن الله.